welcome back to Thrive, where wellbeing converges. Now, this is a bit of a different approach that we're taking this time. We're actually going to do this one virtually for the first time ever. So if there's any hiccups, we apologise, listeners. But this one is going to be a great episode because we're going to explore all things financial wellbeing, and we're joined by an amazing guest, Cate, who's here with me. Hi, Cate. Thank you again for joining us.
Thanks, Curtis. Hi.
Brilliant. Can you tell our listeners a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, sure. Just really quickly. So, probably over 30 years in the financial space, started out in banking and being a teller and moved through all of those roles. I've been a financial planner, been a mortgage broker, and then I've also been a financial counsellor and worked in the not for profit sector in financial literacy and education. So, yeah, all money for all of my working career.
Yeah, brilliant. Awesome. So, this episode, I feel, is going to be a really important one because obviously, very thematically at the moment is the cost of living crisis. Insurance premiums are through the roof. People are worried about their superannuation. The tariffs in the US as well has got people quite anxious. So we're hopefully going to run through a lot of tips and tricks to help you boost your financial well-being. So let's jump into the first question. Cate, you're all set and ready to go?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Curtis.
Awesome. No problem. So the cost of living crisis is a real crisis. So what can people do to manage their budgets during this time?
Yeah, absolutely. And we're definitely seeing that with people that we're talking to. So I think for me, initially, there's two really important things that come to mind. The first is the realization that this is unfortunately really widespread. So if people are feeling under pressure, they're definitely not alone. And often they feel quite alone. The second thing is becoming incredibly mindful about our finances. So for my age group, I kind of felt that in my 20s and 30s, if I just sort of winged it, I would end up okay. But that's actually no longer the case. These days people need to be really planned and very deliberate about managing their money. I think, we all need to make that time. We're all really, really busy, but making that time to map out our financial situation. It's important to realize too that every little bit counts. Often we'll just go, oh, it's only $20 or $50, and it doesn't sound like a whole lot. But when you add that up over a year or over 5 years, it amounts to an incredible amount. So I think the first thing is just creating that mindfulness about money. That's the first step to getting a handle on your finances, and that's going to make a really big difference.
Yeah, definitely. So I guess just off the back of that then, what are the types of financial issues that Aussies are currently facing?
The biggest thing that we're seeing at the moment is people just saying and feeling like I'm just living pay to pay, and I just almost
Mm,
feel like I'm playing catch up all the time. So, often the money that's coming in, it feels like it's just not even covering our daily expenses, let alone other, interesting things that are really important for our financial well-being and for our health and for our relationships. One of the biggest contributors, and I think everybody would agree with this, has been housing. So, regardless
mm.
of whether you're paying a mortgage or you're paying rent, this cost has increased dramatically over the last few years. And for some people, it's just completely out of reach. But the other
Yeah.
things I think that we're seeing is people going through relationship separations, moving from two incomes to one income. Such a huge emotional roller coaster when you go through that situation and then you throw a financial situation on top of that. It makes it incredibly hard.
Yeah,
Um,
100%.
yeah. We're also
Yeah.
seeing a lot of restructures and redundancies in many sectors.
Mm.
So I think that feeling of uncertainty, and so certainly COVID has had a huge impact on that. That was such a shock to all of us and such a change that we needed to adapt to.
Yeah, so I suppose, yeah, because there was that, what do they call it? It was the great redundancy or something during the COVID pandemic. Do you think, I know this is probably a bit more of a career question, but obviously with people's finances, do you think that that's sort of slowed down now in this economic climate that, we're now more conscious about spending more than ever, that people want that security, I guess?
I think it was a huge wake up call for people because, it was that real eye opener that this is such an unplanned, unexpected event, and one of probably the biggest disruptions that, we've seen in a lot of years that affected so many people. So, yeah, I think that it has created a real realization. Certainly, people that we've been talking to said, "I just wasn't prepared for something to happen like this."
Yeah, definitely, definitely. So, I guess how does financial stress impact a person's overall well-being? So, when we look at things like, in my experience, I rent currently. I'd love to buy a house. I'm only 28, so I don't know if that's ever going to happen. But basically, yeah. So, like rents have always gone through the roof. It's really hard to find rental properties. Same thing on the other side for people with a mortgage. So expensive.
Mm.
Groceries are through the roof. Utilities are through the roof. So, how does financial stress, I guess, yeah, just to reiterate, how does financial stress impact a person's overall well-being, and what are some of the early signs that people should look for that they might be in financial distress?
Yeah. So, Curtis, it's financial stress and anxiety. It's a huge impact on our overall well-being. And people often feel like they've just got this black cloud following them around. It feels like it's almost, just hanging around in the back of their heads all the time. Because I think when you think about every time we spend money or save money, it just sparks an emotional response. We might not
Yeah.
even be aware that that's happening. It's a subconscious situation a lot of the time, but it's a
Mm.
real reaction that affects our confidence, it affects our self esteem, it affects that overall feeling of security. And for me, I think that that's the one thing that is the most important for us just as humans. We want to feel safe, we want to feel secure. People don't want to feel vulnerable and unsure of their future. So, finances are difficult. It really chips away at that feeling of security, and our safety is often just eroded over time. So, it has that impact on the individual, but it also is more widespread. It really affects relationships, it affects our partners, it affects our children, all of our loved ones. If one person's financially distressed, it can actually have a huge flow on effect. It also affects us at work and our productivity and our performance. So it's a pretty big impact when somebody's feeling financially distressed. I think
Yeah.
those early signs that you're talking about, that for me is broken into practical items and also emotional ones. So the
Mm.
practical ones just being that feeling of being overwhelmed, feeling that you're living pay to pay, feeling that you're just not catching up, maybe feeling like you can't engage in social activities that you'd like to because you just simply can't afford it.
Yeah.
Um, and then the emotional perspective, that fearfulness, that anxiety, and that can present in different ways, maybe from people not sleeping very well, waking early in the mornings, not wanting to think about their money, trying to find ways of switching off. People often will resort to alcohol or other substances just to check out for a little while.
Yeah.
Um,
Ease the pain, I
yeah,
guess. Yeah.
absolutely. Yeah. And that's a
Definitely.
cycle. It can make it worse.
Yeah, definitely. Because I suppose it's one of those things where it's like, because we're looking at me and my partner are currently looking at our finances and whatnot. Because yeah, we're looking at hopefully buying a house one day. But
Mm.
it's the little things that you look at, like the subscriptions add up because obviously there's so many of them, and then it's buying your coffee in the morning, and it's just doing those little cutbacks because yeah, it's $3, $18 for a subscription or something like that. But it all adds up to thousands in the long run, doesn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. And you know what I find really interesting is, Curtis, for your age and for my son who's 17, growing up with subscriptions is just part of your normal life.
Yeah.
Whereas when I think, I was in my 20s and 30s, that just wasn't even a thing. We didn't need to think about it. But all of a sudden, we've got all these subscriptions that we feel like we just can't live without.
Yeah, yeah, they're hard to let go of, aren't they? You become a bit attached, I guess.
Yeah.
And then, yeah, because it's a weird one, isn't it? Like, just to unpack that a little bit more, I guess, because as we lead into the next question, obviously, these sorts of things, do you see that, like, things like subscriptions or buying your morning coffee or, you know, training into work rather than driving and paying for parking, those sorts of things. Do you think those little cutbacks can help reduce people feeling overwhelmed? And then I guess more holistically, if people are feeling overwhelmed, because I think that's the key word that you said before is that is overwhelmed, feeling overwhelmed about your finances. And if people are in debt and they've also got mounting bills, what steps should they take to sort of regain control, I guess?
Yeah, absolutely. So just to go back to sort of the first part of that question is those little bits. One of the things that is really cool to do when you're looking at a person's budget is we might just look at that subscription and maybe it's, $20 a week or 30 or whatever it might be. And you look at that and you go, that's not much at all.
Mm,
When you extract that over a yearly amount and you go, well, are you happy spending $1,000 or $2,000 on that particular item? And there's just this real sense of understanding of how that $20 can add up over, a relatively short space of time. A year goes by so quickly, and then you can extract that out over a 5-year period. And it just has a really great impact for people to go, well, no, I'm actually not happy spending that amount of money. And if I had that amount of money, I wouldn't be spending it on coffee or on this subscription. I'd go and do something different with it.
yeah,
So,
exactly. Yeah, because I think it's one of those little things as well. And sorry, I'll get you to answer the second part of the question, but it's just sort of pumped into my head before.
yeah.
I guess that like I know, like obviously with smoking and cigarettes and stuff like that, it's obviously the health benefits are the biggest thing to quit, but a lot of the advertising surrounding, in conjunction with the health benefits is the financial aspect, I guess. So there is a point to this, listeners, I do promise. But I suppose, when people are spending like $30 a week on a pack of cigarettes, and then you end up over a lifetime when you work out how much that is, it's an exponential amount of money. I suppose that is quite applicable to what you're talking about. So the side of like the subscriptions and the coffee and all that sort of stuff. So I guess looking at it holistically then, so if people are feeling overwhelmed about debt and bills and things like that, like what do you suggest people do to try and regain that control?
Yeah, there's definitely just some little habits. First and foremost is also always that mindfulness, just that knowledge. Often people are just sort of ticking along and not really taking a lot of interest in what's happening. But just that moment when you can have a look and be engaged in your money and don't just leave it up to chance. I think sometimes that's really hard to face up to as well. But things are not going to improve without intervention. The other part is that practical part, making a list of your income and expenses. For some people, that can be really challenging and confronting to do that. But once they do it and they can see the effect of what's coming in versus what's going out, there's often these amazing light bulb moments.
Mm,
I think the other thing is to realize that it takes change, and to make peace with that. I often think of your money like exercise and nutrition. We don't sort of go to the gym one week and expect that we're going to be looking amazing the following week. It's really interesting with finances. People think, oh, we'll just, spend a little bit of time on this and everything's going to change. We need to really understand that it takes a lot of time, to have an impact. And as you've just said, realizing that those small amounts add up, incredibly over a small amount of, over time. I think the other thing too is not trying not to get persuaded by social media and by friends and peer
mm,
pressure and family. Again,
yeah.
I feel incredibly fortunate that I grew up when I did because none of that was around. So the temptation was a lot less than what it is now.
Yeah, definitely. I work in marketing, and one of the dark arts is that we're all trying to do is influencing buyer behavior. So I know what you're saying. Like social media can have that great impact. That you're just flooded with ads, and when you go on certain websites, if I jump on ASOS and look at a t-shirt on my Facebook page, that t-shirt's there front and center, really trying to entice me. So yeah, definitely trying to pull away from that. I think that's a really key thing that you just alluded to there and highlighted. Definitely. So I guess for my next question, so how important is having an emergency savings fund right now, and how much should people aim to put aside each week, month, those sorts of things?
Yeah, I think an emergency fund is absolutely vital for everybody.
Mm,
From a practical level, it provides people, with that buffer to fall back on when something goes wrong. Or it can actually provide people with an opportunity that you might want to take advantage of. There might be something amazing that pops up and you go, oh, I really want to do that, but I don't have the money to do it right now. So, from that emotional level that we were talking about before, it provides that much needed safety and security feeling that we all need to get from our money. So, just even knowing that there's a bank account there with some money stops us feeling vulnerable, and reduces that distress and anxiety that we have. And I've seen that happen so many times over the years. And it increases confidence, it increases our feeling, our self esteem about ourselves because we kind of feel like we're in control. Again, I guess there's no one size fits all when it comes to this, but as a general rule, at least 3 to 6 months of expenses is a good amount to aim for. Again, reflecting on COVID, that was such an eye opener for everybody who didn't have a buffer saved. All of a sudden, they're not getting paid for work. Their income has changed quickly. I often say to people, your bank account is going to change immediately, but your brain needs a little bit of time to catch up. We're still sort of living like we were, 2 or 3 months ago that we had this income coming in, but immediately your bank account adjusts. So, yeah, really important to have that. And maybe too, for some people, important to consider where you have that bank account. You might not want to have it with your general banking that you're looking at it all the time. And again, out of sight, out of mind, taking the temptation out, stop dipping into it, have it in another bank, don't have it on your phone as an app. Do whatever you can to kind of hide it from yourself.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. I suppose as well, just to sort of look at that as well, like the superannuation side of things, because obviously one of the coalition's sort of policies or promises was opening super for, for buying a home essentially, so getting on the property ladder. And obviously during COVID there was ability to access super. How dangerous is something like that? Because I've always heard that, along the grapevine, it was that if you take, say, 10 grand out of your super in the long term, that's like $100 to $500,000 decision. So, how does that sort of impact people, I guess, and how dangerous is that accessing things like super early?
Yeah, for me, Curtis, I feel like it's incredibly dangerous. Like I even just
Mm.
get anxious thinking about it and seeing that as their suggestion. I'm thinking, gosh, there's so many other things that could be done. I understand it because there's a whole group of people who are just going, I just want to buy property. I want to feel that safety and security. That's an emotional connection, to property. I worry that if people are doing that and they're not good at saving or investing in other areas, they're going to get to their retirement years and there's not going to be anything there for them. We're starting to see that as well with people who are retiring who were of an age when superannuation wasn't compulsory, and they're getting now
Mm.
to their retirement years and there's not much in the pot at all. And they're having to rely on pensions, which just doesn't cover very much at all. So, no, it worries me. I don't think it's a great idea.
Yeah, yeah. Keep it where it is. Take it out when you're ready for retirement, that kind of thing. I suppose
Yeah,
is that the best advice?
I think find other ways to be able to achieve that. And if property is out of reach, it's really about learning about other ways to grow your wealth.
Yeah.
Property was such a thing, particularly again in my day, and we see a lot of people who are encouraging their kids to get into property, but that's because it worked for them and it was cheaper.
Mm.
My first time when I was 22 was $90,000, and
Oh
that
wow.
seemed like
Yeah.
a huge amount. That
Yeah.
property is now $700,000 or $800,000.
Crazy the difference, isn't it?
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
I like to try and have like a bit of a sort of real world example because I suppose our listener base is it's wide ranging. There's all different types of ages, and I guess something that that a lot of people will probably have similarities in is sort of different types of loans, different types of expenses. So I suppose I'm going to try my absolute best to articulate this as well as possible. But I guess say you've got someone who maybe makes 5 grand a month and they have their insurance to pay for, they may have private healthcare, they may have like a car loan, mortgage, rent payments, things like that. And it just adds up so much that obviously, you're talking about that paycheck to paycheck sort of um, feeling that people are going through and like and obviously real world going through. I guess what steps can you take to sort of start saving? I guess is it the little amount, like if you've got $100 that you can put aside, $50 put aside, do it. Because I feel like a lot of people do look at savings and go, I need to save $2,000 of my $5,000 paycheck. But for a lot of people, that's not realistic.
no. Absolutely. All of those little bits. It's the same as when we were talking about cutting down expenses and subscriptions. 20 bucks a week, that's $1,040 a year.
Yeah.
It adds up so quickly. So never discount those small amounts. And then once you start learning about investing and compound interest and how all of that works, like that just increases so quickly over time. So yeah, whatever you can put aside. And I think start off with an emergency fund first so that you've got that buffer, you've got that sense of safety and security, and then start to save for whatever else it might be. It's also really important from an emotional perspective to be able to connect an emotional connection to what you're saving for. So some of us can just
Mm,
save for the sake of saving because that gives us safety and security, and that's the emotional connection that we need. Not everybody is wired that way. So some people need to go, okay, I'm actually saving for a particular item that I feel good about, that I can, get excited about, and that's a good way of being able to leave it in the bank account.
yeah, definitely. I suppose Euro summer for the young ones, what do you call it? The new baby, and then even grandkids, those sorts of things. You're just making that emotional connection to what you're saving for. Definitely. I think that's
Yeah.
really, really good advice.
Yeah. And keeping constant reminders for yourself. Maybe there's little rewards along the way, those sorts of things, and separating those savings into different areas. So I've got a number of
Mm,
bank accounts. I have my emergency account, got my saving for investment account, but then I've got savings for holidays. So I don't have all of that lumped into one bank account. So for me, I like to see my pots of money,
yeah.
so that I can go, right, that's for that figure. That's what I want to use that for.
Yeah, I think that's actually really crucial because I suppose in the past, it's like you open a bank account, you try and get the best interest rate on your finances, I guess, and then you just like lump as much as you can in that one. But then segmenting it and then knowing, and then maybe even goals. Do you think goals are a good one to say, like, 10 grand for this holiday, 20 grand a year for my mortgage for when I want to buy a property, those sorts of things, is just sort of segmenting your bank account and then having goals for each pot of money, I guess. Do you reckon that's good advice?
It is, and that also needs to go a step further, because we often are
Mm,
seeing people who go, I've got this goal, and then we need to work out, is that actually realistic? So
yeah.
plugging that into their budget and going, this is what you said that you actually want to be able to achieve, but is there enough money to be able to do that? If
Mm,
there's not enough money, what can we reduce? If we can't reduce anything, how can we increase income? So, yeah, a lot of people can set themselves up for failure by doing that, because they just go, oh, I just want to save, 10,000, 20,000, whatever it might be. And they're not getting there because they haven't done the nitty gritty work to go, yeah, I can actually do that.
yeah, definitely, definitely. So I want to talk a little bit about like myths and misconceptions. So obviously there's a lot out there. Obviously there's a lot of TikTok and stuff like that where people are, saying they're financial experts and things like that and just throw things out there, and you don't really know if it's, true or if it's fake news, that kind of thing. So I guess, are there any common financial myths or misconceptions that you find yourself needing to correct when you're dealing with financial planning and stuff like that for clients?
Yeah, definitely. And this is kind of the theme of what we're talking about. And the first one is that, it's always worth saving a small amount. So that's the first one. And I think we've sort of spoken about that enough for people to realize how important that is. One of the other ones that we get to see quite a lot is the issue around credit cards. So banks
Mm,
have got a big part to play in this, where clients are putting all of their expenses onto a credit card and aiming to clear that at the end of the month. So some people manage that really well. They're getting the advantage of points and being able to use that. But for the majority of people, it actually just messes with their finances so much. They're oblivious to the amount that's going on their credit card. They're not able to pay it off at the end of the month. So therefore, they're getting charged interest. So,
mm,
yeah, I've spoken to a lot of people over the years who go, my bank told me this is a really great thing to do, put all my expenses on my credit card, put my money
yeah.
into my offset account or into a savings. But at the end of the day, it just doesn't work for everybody. So, um, the other one I think is, what we hear quite a lot is that budgets don't work. I've tried doing a
Mm,
budget before and I can't stick to it and it just doesn't work. And I 100% agree with that. But the story is that they're only doing part of what's needed. So,
okay.
yes, do the budget first, but you have to create a system to go along with that budget. And that's what we were just talking about before, having separate bank accounts. Trying to live out of one or two bank accounts is just too much with the amount of expenses that we've all got at the moment. So, creating that system that will only take you 5 or 10 minutes every time you get paid, that's what's going to make your budget work.
Yeah,
Um,
definitely. Is there any
and
others you
I,
can think of?
sorry.
Was there any others that you can think of, or you've
Yeah,
sort
I
of
think
taken
the
them
other
all?
thing is that investing is too risky. So,
Oh, yeah. My
yeah,
parents go on about that a lot.
yeah.
Yeah, they keep saying it's too risky. I'm not going to do it. So actually, that could be a really good one to sort of unpack.
Yeah, yeah, and it's a lack of education is why we all have that. We're all investing, we all have super that's invested in the share market. Most of us don't understand it. We don't take the time to see where we're actually invested. Most of us don't know that we can choose where that investment is. We're just popped into the default fund. So really learning and understanding investing, and it isn't as difficult as a lot of people think. And unfortunately, we get to hear a lot of the scary stories around investing, and there definitely are reasons why those scary stories are out there. People, I've lost money in shares, got a hot tip and thought this sounds great, and then next minute the shares are plummeting. But that
Yeah,
was before I knew enough information about it. So I think these days, people really do need to start to learn about investing and understand that it's definitely not as complicated as what people think, or what people like to make out that it is.
yeah, definitely. I definitely would like to do a part two where we talk a little bit about investing because I think it would be a great educational episode. But I guess when we just to sort of spend a little bit of time on the investing landscape, I guess, is when you sort of look back in history, I suppose the big things is like the GFC, the Great Depression, where stock markets tanked and people lost a lot of money. How do you sort of like overcome those thoughts and those fears that you don't know when it's going to happen again, and you're not a financial analyst? Most people are just your everyday person who's just trying to make a little bit of extra cash for their retirement fund, if they do an ASX 200 or something like that. How do you sort of what sort of advice would you give to sort of overcome those sorts of barriers where history tells
Mm.
us that investing can be very risky, but in reality it may not be as much?
Yeah, so there's two things that pop to mind. So a great saying that I read a few years ago is that it's more important to have time in the market than timing the market. And I think we hear a lot of stories about people who are doing day trading and picking the market and, buy here and sell here, and it's all very confusing, but it's about having time in the market. It's that old saying, slow and steady wins the race. And the second thing is, if you look at the share market graph over the years, 100 years or so, those times in history have been such a little blip. So, the
Mm,
GFC, tiny little blip. September 11, tiny little blip. Even COVID's a tiny little blip. So,
yeah,
and the continuum has always been an upward swing.
yeah,
Um, and I guess understanding that all of these companies, they're not all going to go broke at one
mm,
point in time. Like, we would have a pretty catastrophic event happening in the world.
yeah,
And diversification is the key. So, not having all your eggs in one basket, and understanding that you want to have a wide spread of investment. So if one sector's down, the other one might be up. So there's a few components to that, and it's really makes sense when you get that opportunity just to even those few things, they start to make sense to people.
yeah, definitely, definitely. And definitely, I just want to sort of preface as well with this episode is that this is just for educational purposes. So obviously, don't take what we're saying at face value. Definitely, sort of consult, those other sort of financial experts like Cate. So yeah, especially when it comes to investing. But I think it's a really key thing to sort of talk about as well. And like, I would love to obviously have a part two because obviously crypto's huge. It's very trending, things like the stock market and whatnot, and people do want to sort of enter but may have those fears. So yeah, 100% we need to do a part two on that one. But I guess getting back on sort of like the cost of living crisis and what people can do to sort of tighten, not necessarily tighten their wallets, but find that financial well-being. So we've spoken a lot about the practical elements to financial management, but are there other elements that we haven't covered, such as the emotional side, sorry, of financial management?
Yeah, this is a really big one, and the two go hand in hand. I learned this lesson many years ago when I would do these amazing, what I thought were amazing budgets for people, and then they'd come back 2 weeks later and they go, I've just done worse than ever. And
Wow.
what it made me realize was that there's different money values and different money personalities. And I did a fair bit of research into that. And for myself, I'm a very security focused person when it comes to money. My money needs to give me that feeling of safety and security so I don't feel vulnerable. Um, but I realized that other people's money values are different. So some people are security focused, Some are more freedom focused. So some people love that feeling that their money gives them if they can travel, if they can, go out for lunch, go out for events, go to concerts. That's how they love to spend their money. And then there's other people who are more prosperity focused. So, people who love brand name items, lavish holidays. I mean, we all love that. Some of us will do it though, and some of us won't. So now when I'm talking to people is tapping into that emotional content of money and going, does this resonate with you? Do you feel like you're more security, more freedom, more prosperity? And then aligning their budget and their plan to their money value. Because if I was to do a security type budget for a freedom type person, they're going to feel incredibly restricted, and they're probably going to go and spend more money than ever because they feel like they need to bust out and break out and spend. Whereas for myself, I get a kick out of not spending money. Like, that's a challenge to me. That's actually fun. So yeah. And I think the other thing to that situation, Curtis, is having a bit of a think about your financial upbringing. So people in your world, parents, caregivers, what was their connection to money, and how much of that have you taken on yourself, and does it actually suit you? And often we're growing up, and I think more so these days, kids are probably growing up hearing we can't afford that, or money doesn't grow on trees, all of that type of thing, and it creates a bit of a negative loop for us around money.
Yeah, I guess actually just to quickly unpack that a little bit is some people may have, caregivers, parents, aunts, grandparents, and stuff like that, who may have been, lack of a better term, title frugal, and then or on the, complete other end of the spectrum, may have been heavy spenders. I guess there's negatives to both sides of the coin, and if you're taking that influence from those who are the biggest influence in our lives, how do you sort of navigate that, I guess?
First thing is recognizing it, because a lot of people, when we have these conversations, they go, I haven't even thought about that. I've not given any consideration to the lessons and the attitudes and the beliefs that I grew up with around money. So I think that's the first thing. Obviously, we want to aim for balance, as with everything in life. There, as you say, there's goods and there's not so goods about both of those sides. But I think, if we can recognize that and then go somewhere in the middle would be good. We want to create safety and security and stability and that buffer for future unplanned events. We also want to really enjoy life and have money available to do entertainment, to, spend time with family, just to nurture that emotional side of ourselves. So somewhere in the middle. And that's easier said than done. It takes a bit of work to get to that.
Yeah, definitely, definitely. When I mentioned, actually, there was one of the rolling themes, because I mentioned in the office today, I said that I'm interviewing you, and everyone said, can you talk a little bit about superannuation? Now, I know we've talked a little bit about it, but obviously it's a bit of a sort of a rocky road to traverse, I guess, when it comes to super. So I guess, again, with that sort of like that myths and misconceptions, if we can sort of talk a little bit about those to do with super, because obviously people are a bit fearful at the moment with everything that's happening out of the US currently. Stock markets, like you've said, your super is invested in the share market. I guess, what would be your advice when you're sort of looking at your superannuation? Is it, obviously most companies, I think it's something like 9 to 11% that they'll do. Do you think that you should put more in? What sort of guidance would you sort of give people in the world of superannuation?
Do you know, I think it comes down to education, and having a talk to your superannuation company is a really good idea, because most of those companies will allow members to have a one-on-one conversation with a super specialist. In those conversations, you want to be getting your head around, again, time in the market and understanding your risk profile. They would do a risk profile for people. So it comes back to whether you're conservative, moderate, all of those sorts of things. Understanding how much time you've got. So for people in their 20s and 30s, this may not have an impact on them. But for people who are at the other end of the spectrum, who are thinking about retirement or close to retirement, this is a huge impact, because superannuation funds at the moment have decreased. The other way to look at this is, if we look back at history and look at 9/11 and the GFC, is essentially, it's almost like things are on sale. So
Mm,
they've gone down, but if you've got the money to put into it, then you're actually getting more bang for your buck. And then
yeah.
hopefully over time things pick up again and you go, well, that actually was a good. But what most of us do is we get fearful and we go, oh, we need to change this, or I need to sell, or I need to move it into cash. And that's just purely a lack of education and understanding. So I think that people should be getting their superannuation statement out, actually reading the terms, getting the knowledge around it, doing their risk profile with their super companies, understanding where they should be and what they should be thinking about for their age and stage of their financial journey.
Yeah, definitely. I suppose actually, just real quick, selfishly, I want to sort of ask this question. How sort of dangerous, I guess, or I don't know if that's the right word to use, but I'll use it anyway. How dangerous is it when you have multiple super funds? So when when you start a new company, you're just like, oh, I don't know my details, so I'll just join theirs. I guess what's the repercussions of that?
No, I think the main thing that comes to mind is just fees. So,
Mm,
if you're paying fees with each number of super funds, then they're getting the benefit of that and you're not. So that's why a lot of people would say, to just consolidate and have it all with one place so that you're not having multiple fees and accounts. It's also easier to keep a track of as well, because I think we're just so bombarded, aren't we, with logins and sign ins and passwords. And,
mm,
it's just another couple of things that we need to remember.
yeah,
Um, uh,
definitely. Yeah, awesome. I've got only a few more questions, so thank you so much for bearing with me. How's your energy? Are you doing okay?
I'm good. Yeah.
Yeah, brilliant, awesome, awesome. I know our listeners are going to be getting a lot out of this, so I'd thank you for taking this time. But I guess what I want to sort of explore a little bit is obviously social media plays a massive part of our lives. It's here to stay. It's not going anywhere. And I know algorithms like to try and target you with specific things. So obviously, when I sit and I go through TikTok and I'm scrolling, I get a lot of like financial sort of TikToks where, it might be things like start a side hustle or join this educational program and things like that. And I kind of want to like understand a little bit is where you should sort of toe the line with these sorts of pieces of content. And then, because when people talk about side hustles, they're always like, "I make 10 grand a month on
Mm.
this, doing drop shipping or stuff like that." But it's a heavily competitive market. One of the ones that I hear a lot is do copywriting as a side hustle. And I've dedicated my life to copywriting, and I can guarantee it's not as easy as a lot of these people are talking about. So I just sort of want to unpack that a little bit. Is how far do you take it as just it's an entertaining piece of content versus whether or not you should actually listen to what they're saying?
Wow, that's such an interesting,
Mm,
interesting question, and it kind of raises a bit of anxiety in
yeah,
me as well. I've always been keen on having something else, and you know, pursuing interests and enjoy making money. Like that's a really
yeah.
good feeling,
They call it
but
side hustles.
yeah, just that overwhelm of what you're talking about, and um, the attraction, I guess, of these people who are saying that they're making a lot of money. I personally try not to watch them anymore because you start to do the comparison thing and going, oh, these people are making buckets of money. You don't know whether they are or not. I still don't know whether they are. I'm sure some people are quite successful. um, I always feel like there's so much work, and we definitely get to talk to people who, like yourself, have gone down that path or thinking about going down that path, but it becomes a stress. They're not enjoying it. They might start out that it's something that's a passion of theirs, and then there's just this pressure to be posting all the time, and you're not making the money, and then you're spending money on more courses and all of those sorts of things. Curtis, I don't know how to answer you properly, to be quite honest,
That's
because
absolutely fine. It was a
yeah,
bit of a curveball, that one. I just think it's one of those things where like there's a lot of financial content out there, and I guess it's actually speaking to people like yourself. Talking to a financial coach, talking to a financial planner, making sure that you know you do just sort of look at these things as educational content
mm,
or entertainment, as opposed to taking it at face value. You know, how I sort of see it, and I don't know how correct this is. This is just from my perspective. I guess it's like if they're trying to sell you a course, they're just trying to make money off you. It's transactional. It's not like I'm trying to help you find, which I'm sure there are some out there, but it's you know, it's muddy. It's a difficult. It's not an easy sort of road to navigate. But I just wanted to sort of just like have a little conversation about that a little bit to just sort of unpack, because obviously social media does play a massive part in our
Yeah.
lives. But I guess it's just be cautious. Do you reckon that's sort of the best thing to sort of to go
I
through?
do. Yeah, I do. You know, over the years, we've seen people who have gone down that path and they've spent buckets of money. It might be thousands of money, and there's nothing at the end of it. And, you know, then they're left feeling broke, but they're also feeling like they've made a bad decision and then they're trying to catch up. My key is just always to come back to the basics, come back to the foundation, look at your income, look at your expenses. Where can you reduce? Where can you increase safely? And what can you learn, you know, to maximize that? And I keep coming back to understanding the investment piece. You know, often that's just easier than having to post and yeah, do all
Yeah,
those
you
sorts of
go through
things.
about 100 different side hustles. Yeah. So I suppose that's
Yeah.
one of those things as well that we talk a lot in this podcast and at Converge in general is just mental well-being and just overall well-being, that if you're just working so much, you're just going to burn yourself out. And yeah, you get the money from it and it might add that little bit of stability, but then you're just going to burn yourself out. And then it's just in the long run, it's just going to have more financial implications. So I guess there's that
Mm.
aspect to think about as well.
Yep, absolutely.
Yeah,
Yeah.
definitely. Awesome. So just a couple more questions. So what role does financial coaching play in helping people not just survive tough times, but actually thrive financially?
Yeah, so I guess we can think about financial coaching in the same way that we think of fitness coaching. So
Mhm.
most of us actually know what we should be doing when it comes to exercising. We know we should be eating well. We know that we should be regularly exercising. I think the same thing applies to finances. Most of us know, you know, that we should be aware of our finances. We should know what's going out. We shouldn't be spending money on wasteful items. But I don't know if you're anything like me. If I go to the gym and just try to do it by myself, I just sort of mess around and, you know,
Yeah.
talk to a few people and go home and nothing changes.
Mm.
Whereas if I have a personal trainer and
Yeah.
that's somebody there who's guiding me, who actually cares what my end result is, motivates me, keeps me accountable, I get a lot better results. And it's very similar with financial coaching. You know, you've got somebody who has the knowledge, has the experience. They also have the care about what you're going to end up, you know, down the track, and just keeps you accountable and keeps you on track and educates you. And so that's sort of a nice analogy, I think, that people tend
Mm.
to understand that
Yeah,
that's
definitely.
exactly what financial coaching is all about.
Yeah, I suppose it's like anything in life where you just have someone in your corner rooting for you. You have that yeah, you'll do more, I guess, than rather just trying to just do it by yourself.
Absolutely. And I think the other part of that is, you know, financial coach shouldn't have any affiliations to financial services and products. There shouldn't be another agenda there. Sadly, in the finance industry, that can happen quite a lot where, you know, you think that you're getting mentored and coached, but at the end of it, it's about selling an investment scheme or, you know, selling some sort of financial service and product. So, yeah, you don't want to do that
Yeah.
necessarily.
I suppose
Yeah.
do your research on who you're actually going to be speaking to and find
Yeah.
out where their affiliations lie and if they are truly independent. Yeah, definitely. Awesome. So my last question for you, Cate. I know it's been a bit of a long one, so I do really appreciate the time you've taken to speak with us. But if you could give our listeners just one piece of financial guidance to help boost their well-being this year, what would that be?
Yeah, so I keep coming back to the basics. So, you know, being able to, one, make the time to look at your finances. I often would say to people, try to treat your own personal finances like you're running a business. If you're running a business, you'd be always looking at income and expenses with the view to making a profit. And it's really interesting that with our personal finances, we don't really take that same view. So
Yeah.
sometimes that's a good thing to think about. What would I do if this was actually a business that I was involved in? I'd be looking at the budget. I'd be making sure we're sticking within budget. I'd be looking for ways to increase our profit. And the second thing to that is creating that process. So, when you look at successful businesses, let's just say McDonald's, KFC, those sorts of places, they are extremely successful because they have a rinse and repeat process, a system. So I actually think that we need to be doing that with our own personal finances as well. It certainly makes people achieve more, but at the same time, it reduces the stress and the anxiety. And, when that payday comes around, you're all set and organized, and you just know what you need to do. So,
Yeah, definitely having a clear system. Do you think? Sorry, I know I've just said the final question, but this is my actual final question. Do you think sort of like those financial sort of like budgeting apps are handy to use?
yeah, great question. And where am I going to go with this? Because again, apps weren't around, when I was
Yeah,
in my 20s and 30s and starting to manage my money. For me, I find them annoying because I actually don't want to spend any more time on my phone or my computer than
yeah,
is absolutely necessary. I find that quite draining. I also feel that having an app can sometimes be, again, out of sight, out of mind. There's so much happening on our phones that we get distracted and people might set them up. I'm not saying that they're not good. There's a whole generation out there who, use their apps and love it. For me, I like a good old spreadsheet and
yeah.
do my budget on that, create my system. Personally, I've got 7 bank accounts.
Well,
And when I get paid, I just transfer my money. I know exactly how much money needs to go into each bank account. I get paid monthly. So that can be tricky for some people because you often feel like you're rich for a week and then you're broke for the next 3.
yeah,
But by separating it into those bank accounts, I just live out of those and I don't need to really think about it. I know I've got a boundary, I know I've got money there. Um, yeah, and a lot of people will go, "Oh, isn't that confusing having that many bank accounts?" But in reality, I live out of 2 most times, my everyday and my grocery account. That's it. And then sometimes I'll go and, shop for clothes. So it'll come out of my clothing account, or I'll go have my hair done. So that'll come out of my beauty account. So
yeah.
it's not like I'm trying to manage 7 bank accounts every single day.
Yeah, I
Um,
suppose it's like clearly labeling what you actually want to sort of achieve with that pot of money, I guess. So, is this one, like you said, for your beauty? Is the other one for your groceries? And then working out of those and just having those clear naming conventions so you know and you're able to understand what each pot of money is for.
Yes, yeah. And that takes a little bit. And that comes back to what we were saying before is that this isn't just a one session, let's do it all, let's get it done. This can
Mm.
take quite a little bit of time
Yeah,
to get it set up. Once it's set up, then most people are really good to go. You've got to tweak it a little bit here and there as situations change. Yeah,
yeah,
but yeah.
yeah, definitely. I suppose so. Just sort of that app question. I guess
Mm.
it's just sort of like, is it just do what works for you? So if it's a paper and pen, if it's a spreadsheet, if it's an app, like just you've got to do the system that works for you and it's going to stick, I guess.
100%. And it's got to be visible all the time.
Mm,
Like I find a lot of people will do one or other of those and then they'll just forget about it. So whether it's paper and pen, you stick that on your fridge and you use a highlighter. I've got a lot of clients who like to do that. I go to Kmart, grab yourself a really pretty journal, write that in there, stick it in your bag, take a highlighter because there's a bit of a dopamine hit that you get when you're crossing things off and you're going, oh, I'm actually achieving, you're seeing yourself getting through that. Maybe that can be created on an app. It can be created on a spreadsheet if you're that sort of person. So again, it comes back to that money personality piece
yeah.
and going, what's actually going to fit in with your lifestyle and the way that your brain likes to operate.
Yeah, definitely, definitely. Well, thank you so much, Kate, for joining us today. It's been an absolute pleasure, and as I've personally learned a lot, and I know that our listeners will also, whether they're watching or they're on Spotify or Apple Podcasts, they'll definitely would have learned a lot from you. So, yeah, really appreciate it. And as always, if we're your workplace wellbeing provider, Converge is here to support you with any of life's challenges. We do offer a financial coaching service, financial support, sorry. So definitely check with your HR team to see if if we are your workplace wellbeing program provider, and then book an appointment with us. And we're here for you anytime, anywhere. And I'd also just like to stress as well that this episode is just for educational purposes. please don't replace it with any other sort of financial advice. So yeah, definitely get out there, seek the information, and yeah, learn as much as possible. And yeah, try things out and see how you go, and talk to a financial expert as well. If you want to get in control of your finances, you want to be proactive, or you want to be reactive, definitely have a chat with those sorts of people. But again, thank you so much, Cate. And yeah, we'll see you again for next month for our 11th episode of Thrive.
Lovely. Thanks, Curtis. Bye now.